John Soane's Museum in Lincoln's Inn Fields is a magical place. Filled with magnificent spaces and intricate architectural details, it's home to an extraordinary collection of paintings, sculptures and artifacts from all over the world. John Soane was one of England's most visionary architects, responsible for many of London's most prominent Regency-era buildings. Before he died, Soane left the house to the nation and stipulated that it must be kept exactly as it was at the time of his death in 1837. But subsequent curators did make substantial changes. Whole areas of the house were remodelled. Works of art and artifacts moved or disposed of, and Soane's private apartments were turned into offices. In 2009, the museum started a massive restoration project dubbed Opening Up the Soane, aimed at putting the museum back to exactly the state it was in when Soane died. This series tells the story of that restoration. Filmed over a period of 6 years, it traces the research, the discoveries and the skills that made the transformation possible. The restored model room is now one of the highlights of the Soane Museum. Soane used models extensively in his architectural practice, as well as collecting them as works of art. The model room is dominated by a massive model of the ruins of Pompeii. But inevitably, over the years, this magnificent room was dismantled and completely reformed. The model stand was cut down and removed. Even the Pompeii model didn't escape. It was cut in half. By the late 20th century, Soane's model room had become a mundane office. By 2013, the model room had been completely cleared, ready for restoration. The challenge now was to recreate it as it was at the time of Soane's death.
This engraving of the model room was absolutely critical to the restoration of that room. First, it shows every detail of the model stand, with the models on the upper level now raised up on sort of sub-plinths, with models of Soane's own works arranged on every level of the great model stand in the centre of the room. On the right, you get a little glimpse of a bookcase with little Flaxman chessmen arranged on its shelves. On the north wall, you can see to the left of the door 2 big watercolours hanging on the wall. One of those survived in its frame, the other one survived without its frame, so we could work out precisely the dimensions that should apply to the central opening here in the wall. And that was critical because on the architect's first drawings he showed the openings too wide and the watercolours wouldn't have fitted. So he adjusted his drawings, and then when we were able to open up the fabric on site, we found precisely where the opening should sit in the wall. It also shows the carpet, and from this engraving, combined with the watercolour in the British Library, we were able to recreate the carpet very precisely.
Attention now turned to the imposing model stand and the detailed cork model of the ruins of Pompeii that sits upon it. The The model stand was carefully restored back to its original width, off-site, by Arlington Conservation, and by March 2014 it was ready to be assembled. The next challenge was to restore the missing half of the cork model of the ruins of Pompeii. It's an extraordinarily detailed model. Soane had visited Pompeii when he was a student, and he bought the model in 1826. But in the 1890s the model was cut down, and one half of it was never found again. Opening up the Soane enabled the museum to commission Dieter Cullen, a leading cork modeller, to recreate the missing half.
They used cork because they wanted to create a ruin, and the ruin has its own character. It's broken, it's damaged, and the cork has its character. It has this damage in it. If you cut cork, it doesn't do what you want to do, it breaks. And this is exactly what you want to show in a ruin, what you want to see in a ruin. This is the emotional part. If you know a ruin, you know its character, and if you find it, when you see the model, you have the impression that you are really that you are really there at the original place. This is a material I use. This is a basic material I have for my work. And you can see here's a rough side, it's the outer side of the tree. And what you see here is how they drill the bottle cork. It's exactly here, piece by piece, they drill out the bottle corks you use from the wine bottles. What I am interested in is the fillet. I call the fillet of the tree, of the cork, and it's the inner part. You can see here the different qualities of the cork. This is from the outer side. It's very rough and lots of holes, which is also interesting if you do landscapes or things like this. But the more you come to the inside of the insulation, that will be fine like leather after. And this you use, of course, for unbroken parts, for unruined things. You know how difficult it is to cut cork. It needs sharp knives. But you can do this easily if you have the right tools. This is the fine quality. With this I can work, of course, with bigger pieces.
It took Dieter a year to restore the existing model and to research and to make the missing half on the right.
For me, it was a big challenge to do this model. We had to use details from the old part of the model and put them into the new part. For example, the columns. You see here a row of columns we used, and we made molds from it to reproduce these lost columns. So it took a long time to finish this project. I think it was 1 year work. And when I at last saw the finished model, I was very surprised. It was such a powerful object, and for me it's a wonder that it looks today like maybe it looked like at Soane's time.
John Soane also collected exquisite plaster models by the renowned French model maker François Fouquet, such as this one of the Arch of Hadrian in Athens. It's a miracle this model can be displayed at all, because this is how it looked after being badly damaged during a bombing raid in October 1940. It then sat gathering dust for 70 years until being restored as part of opening up the Soane. Now another damaged model is about to be restored as well. This one is also by Fouquet and is a faithful reproduction of the Choragic monument of Lysicrates, an ancient Greek monument whose design influenced neoclassical architects such as Soane. To repair the model, the Soane turns to a specialist model maker tucked away in a converted schoolhouse in Bath.
What we're looking at is quite a remarkable piece of work. I am in real awe of this piece because of its detail, but also because of its accuracy. It is absolutely remarkable, and it's my job to fix it. And it's a daunting task, so we're in for an adventure. But what a challenge and what a privilege.
After it was damaged in the war, the model became damp, and the internal iron frame rusted, expanded, and damaged it further. So Tim's first task is to remove the model from its wooden base, in order to check whether there is further internal damage.
I would pretty much guarantee that this is the first time since 1820, where do you need it, John? That the base has been taken off. Okay, brilliant stuff.
Okay.
We there? Right. So I'm going to tilt it back, and then we just
Removing the base could damage the delicate model even further. Tim and John have to work extremely carefully.
I'm just going to try pushing this one up here. I'm not sure whether that. Yeah. Is it going up?
Yeah.
Okay, and we go around again then. Let's see. Yeah, she's going. Just going to winkle it now. Up she comes. Okay. You got the base, John?
Yeah, I've got the base.
Whoa, here she goes. 200 years? Yep, 200 years. The first time this has been seen. Amazing. And I can't see that, but the camera can. So that's the view 200 years on. Mr. Fouquet was the last man to see that. Now we're just going to try and lift this, and we're going to do it by hand.
The next task is to remove some of the loose pieces, causing as little additional damage as
you
possible.
can feel with your fingertips what's going on here. So we're going to try and take this up. I might use that just to see whether we can lift it. So ever so gently, we're going to see where we are. Now, sat there. There we go. Oh, it's gone. So it's gone along the line that we thought it would go, which is brilliant, because this is stable, this line here. And we just pulled it out of the pocket there. And there we are. Fantastic. That's an excellent result. Now we just need to lift this completely clear. This is a result. Very happy. We can actually see that we've got to the bottom of the problem. There is no more excavation that we need to do, and therefore we can now start to reassemble. Brilliant.
Now Tim can start making some of the missing pieces. He starts with the columns. The plaster must be mixed with water very thoroughly to eliminate air bubbles. Once mixed, it will set quickly.
We've got about a pot life time of probably 10 minutes.
The plaster mix will be poured into a silicon rubber mould of a column.
It's a very small mould. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the air bubbles out of it. So run the brush along the flutes and the fillets of the pillar, because unless we do that, the air bubbles will cling into the grooves. So it looks a bit of a mess, but this is all good fun.
Once the plaster has fully set, Tim will be able to remove the column and check for imperfections.
So we're starting to reveal that, and then it will allow us, if we're careful, to open up to the point where we can lift this out. That looks a good mould. Good casting, rather. It doesn't seem to have a lot of air bubbles.
It's essential to preserve as much of the original columns as possible, so Tim will have to marry up his new sections with existing pieces. First, he has to cut through all the columns to separate the top and bottom halves of the model. This will allow him to slide new sections onto the metal rods. Then he starts the process of creating a new section, cut from the newly cast column, to marry up with the existing original piece of the pillar.
And I do this by presenting it alongside the original part and marking up where the cut needs to be.
Inevitably, the new piece will need work before it fits seamlessly with the original section.
So what I'm trying to do is to get as perfect a match as I can on this, which is quite challenging and it takes a time. So the way I do this is I present it along here. So I can see there's a high point on the back of this. And then I take this off and then pare this down very gently onto this face here. It would be easier to replace the whole of the pillar. However, that is not the task, because a principle in restoration is to save and reuse and preserve every part possible. So that process has to happen again and again until we get that marrying up perfect.
Once the two pieces match perfectly, Tim will glue them together and mount the glued piece onto the model. By the autumn of 2019, the repair is complete and the model has been returned to the model room at the Soane. The base has been repaired, the columns are complete, and on the roof every single minuscule tile is perfect. On the floor above the model room, Soane installed an ingenious light shaft which descends to the second floor private apartments.
So the point of the light shaft in Soane's time was really to provide light down to the lower level to illuminate the second floor of the museum, which was his bedroom floor.
But in about 1890, the curator James Wilde completely removed the light shaft and covered over the floor. So the Soane set about recreating the light shaft. They installed a new roof light and removed the flooring. But when they came to reinstate the pictures on the light shaft walls, there was a puzzle. One large picture simply didn't fit. Helen Dorey's deep knowledge of the archive would reveal the missing clue. Buried deep in the curator's draft inventory that was done during Soane's lifetime, she discovered a detailed listing of all the pictures on the light shaft wall, with one key piece of additional information that does not appear in the final version.
There are lots of pictures listed, but the last one is number 414, a drawing of a design by the late Mr. John Nash for a Waterloo monument. And miraculously, above that entry is written, "on ceiling." And that was the critical, tiny piece of evidence that proved that the skylight was not one of Soane's normal half-round skylights, but was actually a rectangular skylight with a flat top to which a drawing could be fixed.
The landing leading to the private apartments is an example of Soane's delicate and thoughtful design. But here again, subsequent curators made many changes. The starting point for the recreation was one of the watercolours painted before Soane's death.
It shows the details of the windows, the internal windows between the staircase and the little oratory on the second floor. And most critically, it shows the iron gate in an open arch between the staircase and the private apartments. This view, with the bill for the gate, enabled our architects to reconstruct it precisely. And when they came to fit the reproduction, they were able to melt the lead in the original fixing holes and reuse it to put in their new gate. To the left of the gate in the view, you see the two internal windows, and one of them has a projecting frame. Again, we were able to recreate that frame, which had been completely taken out in the late 19th century, and put it back exactly as shown here.
After the watercolour was painted, Soane changed the design of the stained glass panels in the windows. Detailed drawings in the inventory enabled the museum to recreate the panels exactly as they were in 1837. But there was still a puzzle.
One of the things on the right-hand sketch, which I found really intriguing, was that the layout of the window looked so odd, with this large central blank pane at the top and all the little subject panels, pieces of historic glass, just in the bottom of the window. It was only when we saw the windows reinstalled that we realised why they were like this. It was to enable the little oratory to be viewed from the staircase. So these were not strange aberrations, but in fact viewing panels to allow Soane's visitors to appreciate the arrangement in a really tiny, narrow passage.
John Soane's wife, Eliza, had her own morning room, also on the second floor. But it too had been utterly changed and turned into an office. By 2014, the room had been gutted and restoration could begin. Today, it's filled with works of art and other objects and is exactly as it was in John Soane's time. The key to the restoration was the discovery of a Victorian engraving of the morning room.
It's particularly crucial because it shows various aspects of the room that aren't recorded anywhere else. It shows where the little table that stands in the window was positioned, and it shows the positions of some of the works of art on the walls. But in particular, it shows the position of the large mirror to the left of the window. And this must have been Mrs. Soane's dressing mirror, in which she could have a look at her clothes before sallying forth into the rest of the house in the morning. It's placed not, as you would expect it, in the centre of the wall to the left of the window, but instead right up against the architrave of the window with quite a gap to its left. And that seems to be an architectural conceit designed specifically by Soane. It's almost as if the mirror is a shutter that has been across the window and opened back against the wall.
There are more than 50 paintings in this small room, and conserving, repairing and hanging them was a challenge.
The approach we have here at the museum is always to see the rooms that Soane arranged and their contents as a complete work of art. He never put things into a space like this randomly. He always arranged things so that the objects had connections and resonances with each other. So it's really important for us that the collection should be arranged accurately as Soane arranged them. Some of them, like this one, had been really highly conserved within the last 20 years and was in very good condition, so all it needed was to be dusted and have a few small bits of damage repaired. But some of the others, particularly a lot of the small ones which had been in storage for many years, were in a very, very poor condition. So one like this was very dirty and it was damaged, so some of the little decoration, which is made of something called composition, was missing, so it looked really very shabby.
The museum's approach to conservation is based on John Soane's own wishes when he persuaded Parliament that the house should be left to the nation.
What we're always trying to do, because we have the Act of Parliament in the back of our minds always, is we're always trying to preserve anything that might be a survivor from the Regency period, because that is going to be from Soane's lifetime, and he was very clear about wanting everything to remain as it was when he died.
This approach can mean careful cleaning, but removing as little as possible of the original finish, except where the damage is severe.
We cleaned it, we repaired all the areas that were missing little bits of decoration. I'm very happy with this kind of approach to treating the frames, because we haven't gone back to an earlier scheme, but we do still have a 19th century gilded surface, and even if it's post Soane's death, so it may be that it was re-gilded on the orders of the trustees in the 19th century because they felt it was looking shabby, it's still closer to Soane and his lifetime than an entirely new gilded surface would be. And that, you know, we are always trying to do as little as possible while also making Soane's collections look cared for. And I think what we feel is we would like Soane or Mrs. Soane to walk into the room and not feel sort of ashamed of how the collections are looking. So this little watercolour is a really beautiful little portrait of Mrs. Soane and their sons. It's very small scale, and when we came to look at this one, the frame had been very crudely oil gilded, most likely I think after Soane's death, because it was a really horrible job. And because it's such a small scale, I think you're close to it when you're looking at it. It really affected the overall appearance.
To confirm their suspicion that this unsatisfactory layer of oil-based gilding was applied after Soane's death, the conservation team carefully removed small sections of it to reveal the original water-based gilding underneath. With this frame there was another clue, a tiny label on the top of the frame with a number used by the curator George Bailey after Soane's death.
We very carefully peeled that label back, and what we found was that beneath it was water gilding, not oil gilding. So that was very conclusive to us that this painting had a frame that was water gilded at the time of Soane's death, and that later the oil gilding was put on and it was just put up to the edges of the label. So that was really, really reassuring, and it made us feel very confident that it was fine to take the 19th century oil gilding off this frame. And this was the result, and I'm very pleased with it because I think it's restored the delicate quality of the frame, which is what the work of art really needs. One of the other key elements in our approach to treating any of the objects in the Soane Museum is to preserve everything that is on that object. In the case of frames, this includes the backboards, which are often 19th century wooden backboards. On those backboards there is often a history of the picture, so there might be numbers written on, and sometimes those numbers are on paper labels, sometimes they're chalk. They also sometimes have framemakers labels. All those things to us are part of the history of the object, and we want them to remain with it.
Once the frame and the picture are restored, the original wooden backboard will be put back, but with a barrier layer of mountboard to protect the picture from the wood's acidity. Even the fixing rings and nails that the pictures hang on were carefully considered. Where possible, the originals were used, but if they were missing or damaged, they were replaced by specially made exact copies, carefully date-stamped to make clear that they were not originals. But sometimes a complete frame had to be recreated. About 100 years ago, the frame of this sketch of the coronation of William IV was replaced and the original frame was lost. But after careful research, the Soane found two black and white photos from 1911 that showed the original frame. This one shows the complete frame, but isn't high enough resolution to show the detail of the decoration. But in a second photo, on the extreme left, it's just possible to see one corner of the frame. But crucially, this photo does show details of the decoration. From these clues, the Soane could create a composite scale photograph of how the entire frame would have looked. To recreate the frame itself, the Soane turned to the specialist frame maker McCarthy's of Tunbridge Wells. They have a huge collection of over 3,000 original reverse-carved wooden blocks of a type that was used to create the decoration of the missing frame.
We were really excited by that because it gave us an opportunity to do what we love doing most, and that is investigating and creating authentic period originals. And so this gave us such an opportunity, and it would excite us to be able to find corresponding carvings in our collection that would be useful, and that's, part of the excitement for us.
The first step was to identify the correct blocks that matched the frame decoration. Then a mixture of compo, a blend of chalk, resins, glue and linseed oil, was prepared and pressed into the blocks. When dry, compo becomes rigid and is a low-cost alternative to wood carving. The frame's complex decoration meant that several different moulds were needed for each section of the frame. Once the frame is complete, the conservation department at the Soane starts the process of gilding. First, frame conservator Claire Coy-Lister applies a solution of pigment and rabbit skin glue. This will enhance the richness of the gilding. Then she gives some parts of the frame an application of a second, different coloured solution. And when that has dried, the frame is ready for the gold leaf. It's so thin and light that a special guard protects it from drafts. The newly applied gilding is so bright that it can disguise the delicate shape of the compo decoration. The solution is toning. This means applying a mix of rabbit skin glue and watercolour and carefully rubbing and distressing the gilding to bring out the shape of the compo decoration. The final result is an accurate and beautiful replica of John Soane's original frame. It wasn't only frames that required restoring. Many pictures also needed attention, like these works which had been damaged by flooding and by direct contact with acidic wooden backboards. The paper engravings are gently washed to remove the dirt and staining. The water has been deionized to remove any harmful metals, and its acid and alkali levels are carefully balanced to draw out as much of the discoloration as possible without damaging the original paper. As the engraving is removed from the solution, some of the yellow dirt can be seen to float off. Some objects had suffered from the bomb that exploded near the museum in 1940. It damaged many of the ceramics in the museum, which were roughly taped back together and stored in cardboard boxes in the china pantry for the next 70 years. Opening up the Soane was an opportunity to restore them, so ceramics conservator Penny Bendel carefully lays out the separate pieces and starts the process of reforming the vase. Once the pieces are glued back together, she fills the tiny cracks between the glued fragments. The filler is a mixture of epoxy resin and a variety of pigments that will ensure that the colour of the filler precisely matches the original glaze. After many hours of careful work, the vase can go back on display in the bathroom, exactly where John Soane wanted it to be. With the second floor private apartments restored, the final phase of opening up the Soane could start. This work would be focused on the basement area. Here, Soane had replaced the original coal and wine cellars with a complex space designed as a homage to the burial chambers of ancient Rome, filled with classical and other sculptures and relics. Pride of place went to the 3,000-year-old Egyptian sarcophagus of King Seti I. In a corner near the sarcophagus are the catacombs, a collection of Roman marble cinerary urns. Soane ensured that these urns were well lit by cutting an unusual star-shaped aperture in the ceiling, which lets daylight filter down to the basement from a skylight. In the late 19th century, the aperture was blocked up and the catacombs completely changed.
Reconstructing Soane's catacombs was one of the most challenging parts of the project, and that's in part why it came in phase 3. We left it till last. It's right in the heart of the museum, a tiny little space that builders had to have access to and that we had to knock down walls in and rebuild walls with all the risks of dust and disruption. Soane created this lovely little space in 1824 as part of the alterations he made to his basement to get the perfect setting for his newly acquired treasure, the sarcophagus of Seti I. And the point of this exciting space was to provide a sort of picturesque route through to see the heart of the basement with the sarcophagus shining at its centre. So visitors would explore the basement, getting glimpses of the coffin through the various openings between it and the adjacent spaces. And behind me you can see all the shelves that we had to recreate, made from very heavy-duty timber, based on the evidence of the watercolours made in Soane's time. All the cinerary urns, very heavy marble objects, which were steam cleaned by our restorers Taylor Pierce Restoration, and various other objects that were conserved and brought back into this area from other parts of the museum. This little corner was like the essence of the Roman catacombs, squashed into a space hardly larger than a broom cupboard.
When the starfish opening had been blocked up, the little lobby above it had also been changed, and it needed complete restoration. Today it looks exactly as it did at the end of Soane's life, with almost 100 objects on display in this tiny space. Each object has been put back as it was in Soane's time, on shelving recreated to his design with its characteristic beading. Close to the breakfast room lobby is the dome area, which includes the magnificent Apollo of the Belvedere statue. In the late 19th century, the wall behind the statue had been opened up, thus scattering the light that falls on Apollo from the skylight above. One of the last restorations of Opening Up the Soane put this wall back, which intensified the light and bathed Apollo in a warm glow, as Soane had intended. It was a fitting climax to the Opening Up the Soane project. Today, Sir John Soane's magical museum is as he would have known it at the end of his life. And its improved facilities mean it can be seen and enjoyed and appreciated by many more people than he would have dreamed of.
I mean, of all places I've worked, the Soane Museum, I suppose, is the closest to my heart. It's a very, very extraordinary place that kind of entwines itself around your heart. I've played a small part in its revival and preservation, and actually I'm really, really proud of it. And it's one of the things that I love coming back here, because it's like coming back to home in a way. It's a very special place.
Opening Up the Soane, known affectionately within the museum as OUTS, has been a resounding success.
OUTS has really been transformative. Now we have a wonderful platform on which we can now turn outwards and engage more with the public through our educational programs, through our exhibitions. In the final analysis, Opening Up the Soane has enabled the museum to recreate the spaces as they were when John Soane died in 1837. It's also created a more visitor-friendly environment and readied the museum for the 21st century.
For me, Opening Up the Soane is a glorious achievement that has made the museum more accessible to visitors, but above all has made it worthy of the title that it's often been given, of being the supreme house museum in the world.